Next up, we're going to be starting to get into the menu system on the camera. So we've covered the outside of the camera. It's now to start kind of digging to the inside. And the first thing that we're going to look at is the way the camera gives information to us through the various display systems. We have three different ways to look at information: the viewfinder display, the LCD monitor, and the control panel. So let's look at what sorts of information we are going to get from these different devices. We'll start with the viewfinder display. When you hold the camera up to your eye, what do you see in the viewfinder besides what your lens is focused on? There is a number of things. We'll start with the actual frame that you are looking at. This camera is very nice because it's one of the least expensive cameras that gives you a 100% viewfinder. It has a very high magnification of 94%, but what you see is what you get. If you line something up on the very, very edge, it is going to be on the very, very edge. Other cameras will have a coverage area of about 95%, so you get a little bit more than you bargained for because they might be not as careful in cropping. And here, it's very, very exacting on the sides. Next up, we have our focus points. We have 39 focus points that you can select either individually or in various groups that we'll talk more about. The key thing to know about is the 9 points in the middle are the most sensitive points. They are cross-type sensors, so they are sensitive to vertical and horizontal lines, whereas other sensors are either only sensitive to vertical or only sensitive to horizontal. It depends on where they are in the frame. But the 9 in the middle are where they are the best. And so if you're focusing on subjects that are moving, it's those 9 in the middle that are going to be the best at capturing that movement. Next up is there's some general information that's really important, and that's why it's kind of in the heads-up display. First off, if you don't have a memory card in the camera, you'll have that little card symbol pop up. If you have your camera in black and white, the BW will come up, or if your battery is low, it'll have a low battery indicator that pulls that information up. In the custom menu, we'll be able to turn this information off so that you would never see this in the frame if this really bothers you. One of the nice features about this camera is that you have an electronic grid display that you can turn on and off. This is controlled in the menu system, and if you want to correct for crooked horizons, or you like using the rule of thirds and you just like the grid pattern as a nice way to frame up your subject, you can turn that on and off. And then down below the frame is the LED information bar. And this is where lots of information is going to be displayed from you. And so we're going to go through this kind of one by one, and we'll start over on the left-hand side. Over there you have a focus indicator. If you would like to manually focus, there are arrows which will basically tell you which way to turn the lens for sharpest focus, and then a dot in the middle that indicates you have achieved sharp focus. So on this camera you can use an old manual focus lens and have an electronic assist to focusing. Next up is the auto exposure lock. We had a button on the back of your camera called the AEL button, and if you have that activated and pressed, that would just let you know that that button is pressed. Flash value lock, it's kind of the same thing when you were activating that with the flash. Flash sync indicator, whether the flash is up and ready to fire, we'll have a little indicator in there for you. Next up is your shutter speed, which will be displayed right here. Now, for you newbies, this is a fraction for the most part. So if you see 1,000, it's not 1,000 seconds, it's 1/1000th of a second. Full seconds will have the two little hash marks beside it. After that is the aperture setting. These are also fractions, by the way. And then our exposure indicator. This is our meter level, how much light is coming in the camera. So if you are setting this manually, a lot of times that indicator will be towards the 0. Right in the middle, that indicates that you have an even amount of light that's not going to be overly light or overly dark. And I do have to give, I love Nikon, I like Canon, I like them both, but I'm going to have to give Nikon a little bit of a hard time here because the way the camera comes default from the factory, the minus is on the right and the plus is on the left. And anyone who's been to math class and enjoys numbers will find that a bit aggravating. But luckily for Nikon, they have realized the error of their ways, and they have a little custom feature that you can reverse the plus and minus indicators if you don't like to have the minus on the right-hand side, and you want to have the minus on the left side because it seems more natural. So that's the exposure level indicator. We have another battery level indicator right there. And then we have our flash exposure compensation. If we have set a -1, which is what I have softly recommended, you will see that indicator turned on in the viewfinder. We have our bracketing, something you want to only use judiciously from point to point. It's not something you generally leave your camera in all the time, so you do want to be warned of it if it's on all the time. Same with exposure compensation. Our ISO, if we are adjusting the ISO, normally in this camera it doesn't show you the ISO in the viewfinder, but we will have a custom function where we can turn the ISO on. Normally it's going to be the remaining number of frames. If we have the auto ISO, which is something I don't recommend using, you can see if it is turned on, and it's a good warning indicator. This is where various bits of data will be displayed. Normally it's the number of shots remaining. So if you hold it up, let's see if I hold my camera up right now, I have 132 pictures that I can take, but if I press halfway down on the shutter release, I get a little R, it's a very poor looking R, 28, which says that I have remaining 28 shots in the buffer. This camera can record a lot of images depending on the size of the memory card, but it also is also limited by the internal memory, because all the pictures get stored to an internal memory so that it can store pictures very, very quickly. And I can shoot right now on this camera, the way it is set up, 28 pictures. And that's going to vary according to how you have your camera set up, with everything from RAW to JPEG settings to compression settings to bit files. And we're going to run through all of this when we go through the menu system as to how fast it's going to shoot. But the buffer is very important to sports shooters, because I can shoot 28 continuous shots, and after that the camera slows down significantly. And so keep an eye on that when you're shooting sports. There's a little K button. If you put in very large memory cards that have over 1,000 shots, you will see the K. If you saw 2.1 K, that means you're going to have about 2,100 shots left on your memory card or cards. And then your flash ready symbol right there. And that's what you're going to see in the viewfinder. So let's look at the control panel up on the top of the camera. Here we're going to have a lot of the information duplicated again. It's just good to have this information in a couple different areas. So first and foremost, at the top we'll have our shutter speeds and our apertures. We'll have our memory cards. If we have 2 memory cards, they will be indicated in there, but the one with the number on it will indicate where the information is getting written to at that period of time. We'll have our ISO right there above our shots remaining. This is the total number of shots remaining on the camera. And actually, if you press halfway down, you will see that remaining number in the burst as well. If you press halfway down on the shutter release. So you see 2 different numbers, the total number of shots and the remaining number in that burst. We have our metering system that we've chosen, the focus points, as well as our whole focusing system right there. Down at the bottom, we'll have our white balance and our symbols along the bottom. Our image quality along the left-hand side. And then our flash mode, if we have one selected in there. And then if our battery is low, we'll see that up in the upper left-hand corner. And just as a reminder, if you can't see what's going on in there clearly, don't forget the light that is active. That is the spring-activated collar right around the on-off. That'll turn the light on so that you can see what's going on in that control panel a little bit more clearly. Next up, let's talk about the display control in the back of the camera, the LCD panel. First way to look at information is by pressing the info button, and that'll pull up a lot of the information that we've just been looking at both in the viewfinder and on the top LCD. When you are accessing information, you're going to be using the multi-selector to navigate up, down, and left and right. And then you'll be using the command dial and possibly the sub-command dial for making changes once you are in the menu system that we are about to get into. And then, of course, using the OK button to kind of enter your selection. So when you press the info button, there is a info screen on the back of the camera that displays lots of information, and it can display it in a couple of different ways and colors, so yours may look different than this. At the top, we have our shooting mode, program, shutter priority, aperture priority, manual, and so forth. Our shutter speeds and apertures right along the top row. As we move down from that, there's a lot of features that we will be setting in various places on the camera, and these aren't things that you can directly control from this screen. It's just showing you the information. So for instance, our flash mode, there is an Wi-Fi card, which is a wireless transmitting card that you can get. If it was activated and in the camera, you would see that here. Flash lock symbols, exposure compensation. Once again, these are being seen for the third time in some cases. Just important information, whether the beep is turned on or off on the camera. This camera can shoot multiple exposures. It's kind of important to know that you're trying to shoot multiple exposures, and it will give you that warning indicator there, as well as bracketing. We have our exposure indicator on the back of the camera there, and our drive mode. And if you want to change any of these settings while this is activated, you can see that changing right there in front of you. Over along the left-hand side, we control the image quality. We'll have RAW images and JPEG images and which card they are being stored to. Card 1 and card 2. Card 1 is the uppermost and the card 2 is the bottom of the two cards. And in the main body of the information, there is a comment that you can add to all of your photographs. You could have your name or a copyright symbol or something like that. We'll get into that in the menu system. That just indicates that it's activated. There is an internal battery that controls the clock on this camera, and the battery that you plug in charges that battery. And if you were to unplug your camera and turn it off for a very long period of time, that clock symbol might come up that indicates the clock battery is low and needs to be charged and reset. And you charge it by just simply putting in a normal battery. Your metering pattern will show up, as well as an intervalometer. It's a very cool feature. I'll show you some fun examples of what you can do with an intervalometer on this camera. Whether you have the GPS unit hooked up, and then how good the camera battery is, and if you have the vertical grip, which is called an MD11 grip, how good the battery is in that camera will show up there. Your total shots remaining will appear there as well. And then our white balance selection will be right down there at the bottom. That setting. Our ISO, our focus mode, and our focus points. So you can see there's a lot of information that is shown 2 or 3 times on this camera. Down at the very bottom, this is different than the rest of the area on the screen because here we can press the info button a second time to get in and activate and make changes here. And so some of the features that Nikon felt was most important they put here so that you could change it. We're going to see them again when we get into the menu system. So we have movie size, high ISO noise reduction. There's a problem with shooting at high ISO. You get a lot of noise, and the camera has a built-in noise reduction system that you may want to turn on or not. D-lighting, which will control the lighting. I'll have some examples later on. Our color space, which color space we have chosen. Our depth of field preview, that button in front, I said it's assignable. And just for kicks, if you go to that setting right there and you press OK, you can see a long list of things that you can program that button to do if you don't want it to do the depth of field preview. Personally, I think depth of field preview is kind of a nice feature to have, so I'm going to keep that locked in there. The one below it is the function button, and this one is customizable, so for fun we'll just kind of go in there and we can reprogram this to control one of the other features. Someone was asking about ISO. Let's see if we can set it to control ISO, which I didn't see on the first pass through. And so it doesn't look like you can change that, unfortunately. What's this just saying? But maybe you want to activate spot metering, so you could select that, which would be the function button in the front of the camera. The auto exposure lock button on the back of the camera can also be programmed. You can go in there and use that to do it. Picture control is a way of controlling the contrast, color, saturation of the images. You can do that with JPEG images. Long exposure noise reduction, which is similar to high ISO noise reduction, something we'll talk a little bit more about. And then finally, distortion control is another feature that we will cover a little bit later on.